So here is the Django REST framework. In order to use it, you first install Django, and then you install the Django REST framework, and you include it as an app. So just like any other third-party app we've seen in Django so far, and it uses the core functionality of Django, and basically minus the templates. We'll see what how that actually works. The documentation is good. It can be a little overwhelming, I think, depending on your kind of level of familiarity with Django. So, and I will say that the REST framework is more strongly oriented towards class-based views than Django. You can use functional views in the Django REST framework, but I'd say the strong default is to use class-based views. Though that doesn't mean you have to. So if you look here at the API guide, there's a lot of things here. There's a few things that should look familiar, requests, responses, views, generic views, routers, maybe. So routers is new. The Django REST framework has, we won't talk about those today, but it's basically a way to kind of automatically configure your URLs. So you don't have to explicitly write all of your routes. And then the real kind of difference is something called serializers. So a serializer is a class. A class in the Django REST framework. There are a whole bunch of different kinds of serializers, just like everything else. But the basic job is to go to and from JSON. So you have a Python data structure, a query set, something like that. And you need to transform it into JSON so you can send it out. You can communicate with whatever client is interacting with your API. And then you also need to receive JSON from the client. I mean, you could use other things like XML, but we'll be using JSON. So you receive JSON, and then that JSON gets parsed and turned into a model instance or something like that. So the job of the serializer is really, it's kind of like the template. It's the real intermediary between the client and the server. So the client and your API. Okay, so we'll start from scratch, and we'll just make a basic project here. Yeah, so I'm gonna go through the beginning just because it's probably useful to have a reminder about how Django works. So we will first create a virtual environment. And I'll activate it. Now I'm going to install Django. And once I have Django installed, I'm also going to install the Django REST framework. So one big long word, pip install Django REST framework. And now, just as usual, most of this process is going to be just what we did for Django. So I'm going to start by creating a project. Okay, I'm going to cd into my project. And I'm going to run, I'm going to create an app. And depending on how you structure this, people sometimes like to call this app basically API or something like that. You can do that. This is going to be a like blog posts kind of thing. So I'm going to call this blog API. Can you use dashes in project names? No. Underscores. All right. So now I have my blog API. I'm going to go to the project level into the settings, and I'm going to add the app that I just installed. So that'll be blog API. And then I'm also going to add the Django REST framework. So that is REST underscore framework. So this is the Django REST framework. So we're adding it on as a third-party app. And basically, you don't need to do anything else for the moment for this like very simple use case. Okay. And once we have that set up, I'm gonna start from the top and do the usual kind of Django stuff, the URLs. So I have this other app that I want to connect. So if I go to path API, then I want to include okay, so this should look pretty familiar. Done that lots of times, although a little while ago. And then in blog API, I'm going to add URLs. And in my URLs, I'm going to do the usual. So from Django.urls import path. And then we can start talking about routes. So this will just be a way to get blog posts, basically. So we're going to have one model. It'll have, well, essentially we'll have two models. We're going to use the built-in user model. So we'll have posts with a foreign key to the built-in user model. So we can have a number of different routes, but just to keep things simple, we're going to create just at first. So we'll have basically the list view here. This will be posts. And we will do, so we have to import from let's do so we're going to use the class-based views here. So we have to call this as a function. All right, so we have our pattern set up. So now we're going to have to go into views and we're going to create this view. Before we do that, I think let's go ahead and set up the models. So our model, we're going to have a, we just want to have a post, and we also going to need the user model. So the built-in Django user. So from Django.contrib.auth.admin models. Yeah. So we'll use the user model, and then we'll have class we're going to inherit from models.model. And then we can have author that will be models.foreign key, and we'll pass in user. So I'm not gonna customize the built-in user model, just keep things simple right now. So user, and then on delete, models.cascade, and then the related name will be well, posts. Okay, and then we'll have a title. And a body. Okay, and then we'll override the string method. Okay, so far, nothing different about anything we've seen from Django. So we have our models. We have, I think the next thing we should do is the serializer. So the serializer, again, is going to be this, it's going to be this intermediary that basically translates from Python objects to JSON, and then back and forth from one to the other. So it's set up to look like a model. So if you have the Django class-based model, the model form in Django. So if you have your actual model, and then you have a form, which is typically going to be based on that model, use a class called a model form, and that's very similar to what the serializer kind of looks like. It's because the serializer is closely going to be tied to your information, the information in your database. It will end up looking very similar. So we'll have to create the serializers here. So we'll create a new, so this is a new, you don't have to, just like anything else in Django, you don't have to create all these individual folders. You can mash it up into one thing if you want, but this is standard practice. So we create a serializers, just like we would create a forms.py or something like that. And while this is going to look like a Django form, it's actually going to be using the Django REST framework stuff. So we're going to import from REST framework, import serializers. And then our serializer, is going to have two, just like a form in Django, it has two required fields. It has the model and then the fields. So you have to you create a class, you tell it which model it's going to be based on, and then what fields you want to display from that model. So let's import our models. So from .models, import blog post. And then we're also going to have to import the user model. So from Django.auth. Okay, so we have everything we need now. So we're going to create a class called post serializer. So the standard convention here is to whatever your model name is, serializer. So class. And that's going to inherit from serializers.model serializer. So this is all stuff you can find in the documentation. So you have the API guide, the serializers. So this kind of goes through what exactly the serializer does. Basically just transforms things into JSON and then back again. Model serializer. So here's what this is going to end up looking like. We just have these two required fields, the model and then the field. So obviously there's a lot of other things you can possibly do, but this is the basic use case here. So class meta, and we're going to have a model, and that is going to be based off of blog post. And then we'll have a field. And this field could be an iterable of, what is it? So author, title, body. All right, and so that'll work for now. We can come back and tweak this a little bit. But that's the basic idea. And then in the views, so there are a number of different kind of views in the Django REST framework. There are just there's I mean you can use functions and everything else, but the useful ones basically are going to be the generic views and then the view sets. So generic views contain basically individual, I want to list things out, I want to create a resource, whatever. And then the view sets kind of combine this functionality. So oftentimes the typical use case is I want to either I want to go to the same endpoint, and depending on whether I make a get or a post request, I want to either view all the resources or create a resource, things like that. So there are all these combined view sets that also work in concert with the router, the built-in Django REST framework router, which you can use but don't have to. So for the views here, we're going to use let's go to the generics views. So we'll import generics, and then there's a whole bunch of these. So this is a list create view, which I was basically just talking about. So either if I make a get request, I get all of the resources. If I make a post request, I create a single resource. So there's a whole bunch of these. So we'll import that. Import generics. And then let's do, first we'll do a blog post list class. So this is just listing. So this is just going to be make a get request. And just like these other class-based views, so this will look just like Django. It's designed to kind of feel like Django, but it's not actually. So we'll import generics, so we're going to inherit from this REST framework list API view. And it needs two things at minimum. It needs a query set, and it needs a serializer. So the query set is basically going to be whatever model is associated with this. So blog. So the query set is going to be the blog model, and then the serializer class is going to be the serializer that we just made here. This would be the blog post serializer. Okay.
Just to confirm, is the model supposed to be blog post as well? Or is it
The model?
or blog post?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Why did that even work? Yeah, blog post. Thank you. Okay, so we have our blog post list, and then in URLs, let me make sure it's now called. All right, so I'm gonna do all the migrations. Create a super user. And then run the server. So one of the other things that Django gives you, or that the Django REST framework gives you, that's very nice, is it's a very nice interface for dealing with your API. /posts. So you get this. We don't have any posts, but here we're going to this this endpoint, which is serving up a JSON object, which in this case is totally empty with everything we have. So we can go to our admin panel and create some posts. And I'm gonna have to, sorry, I forgot about that. Go to the admin. Okay, so the title will be and I'm going to add another user. All right, and I'll create another post. All right, so now if I go back to our route here, so what is it? API slash I get this JSON object back. And if I use another tool like Postman, I also get that same JSON object back. So I am actually getting JSON, and you can actually view it here. So I have an extension that does this when I'm looking at JSON in my browser, but you can view it in either way. So this is, it's very convenient. It's I wouldn't say that it replaces Postman, but it's pretty handy.
And just to be clear, you didn't create the API/post endpoint. That's just part of, it's just baked in.
No,
that
I did. So there is
You
a
did create it,
router.
okay.
Yeah, so I did, but there is a router. So I have my project level URL, which is, so that's where the API comes from. Then that gets handed off to this URL, which is posts. So I created that route, but you can take a look at the documentation. So this works with view sets. So I'm not using a view set here. I'm just using the generic view. But if you use a view set, then it will basically auto configure your URLs for you. So it's, it's more magic. Okay, and so right now, all I can do is make a GET request. If I try to make a POST request, the same route, I'm going to get, I can't do it. You called via POST, but yeah. So this route doesn't handle POSTs, but it's very easy to get this to handle POST requests. You just change the the class that it inherits from. So you go to views, instead of list API view, you do list create API view. So now this will handle both things. And if we look here, I'll refresh it, you can see that now there's this form here. So again, the GUI here is very nice, especially for kind of ad hoc testing and playing around, because Django REST framework knows that this route handles post requests, so it basically creates this form for you automatically. So I can create a new post here, and if I make a GET request back to this route, that new resource gets created. All right. So there's also, so this is list and create. So this would be a common kind of pattern, but you can also create a detail view. So we go back to our urls.py, not that one. We can create a detail view as well. And that works the same way as it did in Django. So path, and we can do posts / and then / and then we'll have to create the view. So this will be blog post list. We'll call it blog detail list, or blog post detail. And we'll go into the views. And this time we're not going to inherit from this create API view, but we can inherit from. So there's, I mean, there are a lot of options here. You can go to generic views. You can see there's the generic API view. You could just have one for destroy. There's retrieve, update, destroy. We'll use this one. So this is basically, you can do anything to a resource. Used for read, write, and delete endpoints to represent a single model instance. So this would be a detail view. So we'll use that one, retrieve, update, destroy. And the rest of this works the same way. You need the query set. All right, so let's take a look at this now. So that still works. And we should be able to go to post one. And we have this. And we can do all of the, all the things that we can do with Django. So delete. So let's try using, I'm going to try using Postman here. Try to delete this. So I got 204 response. So this should be gone. The post one is gone. You can also create a new post. And if I go to, let's say probably 4, I can also modify this. So make a put request. And it's modified. So it just gives you all of that functionality kind of right out of the box. Okay, so a common pattern that we'll see is that we don't, as it is right now, maybe we don't want the user to be able to specify, what user. We want to get this information automatically, and we're not going to go into authentication or anything like that. But if you're using, so this will only work if you're using the built-in GUI, because you need the browser to save the user. But we can actually play around with the serializers to see what gets displayed. So we have the author, title, and body. So I'm gonna need to create a, let's see. Might have to create another serializer. Let me try this. Okay. So you can change, there's a whole bunch of these other kind of modifiers you can make to change how things are displayed. You can display nested data. You can do all kinds of other things. But here, let's grab in the views. What we want to do is we want to grab the user from the request, so you don't have to specify it. So that means we're gonna have to override. Let's see. We'll do that here. We'll do that here, I guess. So there's a method, basically a lifecycle hook called perform create, and you can override it. So it will take self and then a serializer, and then you save it. And you can specify a field. So in this case, it'll be author equals self request user. So when I marked my serializer, when I marked this author field as read only, now it doesn't show up in this kind of auto-generated form here. So if I create something and I post it, it automatically got that user from the request and put it in there. So just like we would do with Django, except it's it's the same basic idea. We're overriding a method in the Django lifecycle, but it's a different method, but same basic idea.
To clarify, for the post or the blog post detail in
Yes.
the path when you're specifying the PK, is that just kind of like doing it automatically on the back end where the query set is just going to find the PK?
Yeah, so I believe that this is actually, it has to be PK. So let me, well, let me just get rid of this first, and it should throw, let's see. Yeah, so expected whatever the post detail to be called with the URL keyword argument named PK. So by default, it will expect something called PK, or you can change that. You can customize that value and tell it we change it to. So the default would be PK. So just to, this is different, but most of it, you should be able to get 80% of the way there, just based on Django. So the models are the same. The URLs, can be the same. It's just this serializer, this new serializer thing, which is kind of like a model form. And then your views are going to look very similar to the class-based views in Django. And also, by the way, in terms of like making certain things easy, where is that? Yeah, so it comes with just like, so, we're not going to get into auth, but I can add this URL pattern here to my top level URLs. just like when we use the Django's built-in auth stuff. So this is going to give us some free endpoints. So I'm going to go to /API auth. So you just got that for free, so I could log in as one of these other users if you wanted to play around quickly instead of having to go log in and log out all the time. And you can see the other routes that are available. So admin, API, login, log out. So I think that's it as an introduction to the Django REST framework. So the documentation can be, I wouldn't just start reading the documentation necessarily. So again, everything else, most everything else from Django should be the same. It's just the serializers that are a new thing, and the views are a little bit different. And we'll do this for us. So today is just going to be the Django DRF, and starting tomorrow we'll hook up React to the backend API. So there's a challenge for today, which is pretty, generic. It's just trying to get you used to making something with the Django REST framework. So you're free basically to do whatever you want. You can play around with different things. Yeah, that's it.